Sloth. Now, in my wife's defense, she was going to a retreat for clergy, and so she thought she was going to be gone next week, which in the pattern of the sermon series was going to be sloth. Then it got moved up, but she kept me with sloth. That's the story. Okay.
You already started working on the sermon. I didn't want to make you do double work.
I had read the scripture so far. That was the extent. Anyway, that's all right. So my day job is as the communications director for what's known as the Great Plains Conference of the United Methodist Church. It's a long title that basically means my team and I provide consultation work and support for roughly 1,005 congregations of the United Methodist Church within Kansas and Nebraska, and one church in extreme eastern Colorado. And so what we do is any number of things related to communications, audiovisual systems, support for launching new ministries, anything that they do that we need to help with publicity, those types of things. But before I went to work for the United Methodist Church, I spent 20 years as a journalist. I was trained right here at KU. My degree is really interesting and appropriate. It's a BS in journalism and mass communications. I worked my way through school as a sports correspondent for the Wichita Eagle. And so it meant that I had the best seats in Allen Fieldhouse, opposite the other team's opposing coach, right on the three-point line in some pretty good years for KU basketball. But besides covering KU basketball and football, I covered all the not so exciting stuff. I covered cross country. I covered swimming and diving, which is actually a really fun sport, but it was the one that nobody else wanted, and I actually got to do those things and had a good time with it. After I got out of school, I had my professional titles have always been this. It's been copy editor and page designer, and then I was an assistant sports editor, and then I was what was called the news editor, which is a fancy way of saying I handled the front page. And then the last 14 plus years of that 20-year career, I was the executive editor of a Gannett property, which meant we were a regional USA Today site in St. George, Utah. And so I did a lot of different things in that first career. But one thing that was very consistent across my evaluations, if you looked at all 20 years, you're going to see two things in pretty much every one of those evaluations. One is that me and my team, we met deadlines. And the second thing was that we always exhibited a high energy and high efficiency rate. And I took a lot of pride in those two things because it meant that we got stuff done, and we got it done well, and we got it done fast. I took a lot of pride in that. My dad probably is the one that taught me the most about it. He had a lawn care service that before I was writing stories, I was cutting grass. And his big thing was, if you're going to do a job, make sure you do it right, because you mess up not just yourself, but you mess up the reputation of the company, and you cheat the customer if you're not doing your absolute best every time you go out. I think that's pretty important. And then deadlines, of course, are important in my profession first, and in this second career. If you miss deadlines, you mess things up for a lot of people. And so deadlines are crucial. So I thought it would be kind of fun to look at perhaps the biggest blown deadline in the history of publication. It's the Oxford English Dictionary. This was created as a concept in 1879, and the idea was it was going to be a multi-volume, every word known in the English language was going to be in this multi-volume set. They thought it would take 10 years. 5 years in, and it's funny how God works sometimes, that he puts some interesting correlations in place as we go through this, but the word that they were at 5 years in, ant. Think about that for a second. A-N-T. That's as far as they got in 5 years. It wasn't published until 1928. It took 49 years for them to get this done. What happened in those 49 years? Well, Queen Victoria, who was a big fan of this idea, died. World War I had come and gone. We have jazz taking over the music world. The automobile had been invented and had been in wide use now for years. And airplanes that were just a dream when they started this now were being used not just for transportation, but had been used in warfare. They had to have words now for all these new things. So as a result, the day that this finally published in 1928, the team had to go back and start the second edition because so many things were left out of the first edition. It was already out of date. That's the history of the Oxford English Dictionary. Why did it happen? The people who wanted to do this were put together on this team, and they were, and by the way, obviously it took 49 years, so not the people who started it, they weren't the ones that finished it. But the people who started this project said that they really were behind this project. They wanted to create the most comprehensive dictionary of the English language known to man at that time. But when they kept getting talked to as they were recording, why did this not get done? It was because other things came up. Other things took priority. Other things got in the way. It took a generation for them to finish the Oxford English Dictionary in its full volumes. Something kept getting in the way. I want you to think about those words today as we go through our talk here, because I want you to keep that in mind. It's a key part of the deadly sin of sloth. As Amy said, we're continuing our sermon series on this subject of 7 deadly sins. Today is sloth. And I want you to understand that I do not fault anyone for resting. I love my couch. We finished our basement downstairs, and my absolute favorite thing to do is something I got to do a little bit yesterday. I went downstairs, I laid on the couch, I got the pillow just right, I turned on football, I was good to go. I actually did not get the nap taken. I tried, but it didn't quite happen. But I want you to understand that I don't really see that as a sin, I see that as rest. Jesus took rests. The Gospels say several times, Jesus, once the task was done, he went off on his own to pray and to rejuvenate himself and to rest. Rest is important, but there's a key component to when Jesus did it. After the job was done. He was resting at the end of one job and before he started another one. That's important for us to remember, and it's a good way for us to determine what of it is sloth and what of it is rest. So what do you think of when you think of sloth? I tell you what crosses my mind. This cute little guy, yes. But when I think of the sin of sloth, I think of, okay, the person that just decides they don't want to get a job, so they're just going to sit at home, and they're not going to work. Or I think of the spouse who doesn't help with doing the dishes or doing the laundry. I think of the teenager whose room is really messy and they don't take the time to clean it up, even after being told many, many times. You can tell we have experience with that particular last one. But that's only part of sloth. We think about this physical activity and the lack of activity, and it must just be laziness. But that's not really what sloth is when we talk about biblically what is this sin. We talk about sloth, and really the biggest part of it is something that all too many of us suffer from. It's letting things get in the way of our relationship with God. Folks, today might be a little uncomfortable. I'll just be totally honest with you. I'm probably going to step on a few toes this morning. Sorry, not sorry. I think it's important because this isn't about making me feel better. This isn't about getting more people to do things in the church, although that would certainly be a great thing to happen today. But this is about your relationship with God and getting past the lies, and that's a strong word, but it's the truth, the lies that we tell ourselves that we're doing everything we can in service to God. Because Jesus knows the answer, and he knows the truth. We can lie to each other, but you can't lie to the one who died for you. That's what today is all about. Remember that we have a vision statement that we've worked on, your church leadership has come up with. It's in the bulletin every week. It talks about 3 forms of relationship. Relationship with God, you with the people in this congregation, and us as a church with the people outside the walls. The first year we're talking about is this very first part. It talks about growing in our relationship with Jesus Christ. I was convinced before I started studying this, but since I've been working on this particular message, I am convinced that the biggest struggle we have as a church, and I don't mean Central United Methodist Church, I mean as a body of believers worldwide, is that we are letting other things get in the way between us and Jesus. And the rest of the secular world is noticing. And it's creating even fewer and fewer people to follow God. And it's our fault. Those are some harsh words, but let's get started here and I'll explain why. First, we got to start with the Greek lesson. I know that's exciting, right? But there's a word for sloth in Greek, acedia. And acedia means, in the Greek, negligence. When we think of sloth, we kind of think of this forgotten sin. That's surely not me. I'm not lazy. I work all the time. Matter of fact, I work all the time so much that I'm tired all the time because I'm working so much. But negligence has a different connotation, doesn't it? Neglect. Neglecting our relationship with God. Let's look at the word. And this is so not me studying the word. So I had to look this thing up. Acedia. In Greek, it has two components. A of the acedia means absence, and cedia means care. So literally, if we take the Greek to English, sloth means we don't care. Do we really care about our relationship with Christ, or is it just lip service? That's what I really want us to focus on this morning. There's a big question. Is Jesus really first in our lives? That's the question that hangs over everything today that I invite you to answer as we go through this. But I think we need to start with something that we're all familiar with. Who here has found it a struggle with customer service in a restaurant or a store? Okay, I see a lot of hands. I see even more people nodding. Because that happens to all of us, right? I remember as a kid in Northeast Leavenworth, which is really not a good part of town, at least it wasn't when I was growing up in that era, was a little restaurant called Dubox. This place was probably no bigger than half of our fellowship hall. It was a tiny, tiny little place, maybe 10 tables. I was trying to remember, visualize it in my head. It might have been 10 tables, but my parents had a rule. We went out to eat one night a week. And we would go more often than not either to this little place called the Town Pub or to Dubox. The thing that was cool about Dubox was it had these two older ladies that served as the waitresses, and the service was phenomenal. They not only knew us, but they took care of us. I don't remember our drinks ever being even halfway empty before they refilled them. And I really remember they must have been good because my dad, who in that era, tipping 10% was kind of the normal thing, I remember him having me do math problems to do the 15% when we went to Dubox because the waitresses were that good. Today, we actually have excellent service in most of the places we go, but what do we remember? We remember when we go somewhere and get awful service or we have a really bad experience. That's how we remember things today. But think about the people that provide that bad service to us. Do they want to be that bad? Usually not. Matter of fact, I bet most of them think, hey, they're working really hard. And it's circumstances that make them provide bad service. They don't have enough help. Too many customers came in at one time. All those types of things factor into good and bad service. The reality is the church is no different. If we have a guest that comes into our congregation and to another congregation, if they don't see good service to Christ and good service to other people, what do they take away from their experience? The same thing we take out of our experience when we go into a business and we don't quite get good service, and we remember that. That's an obstacle that the church is facing today. So I started looking at what is sloth? And it's really interesting. There are a lot of websites out there that look at 7 deadly sins. Now, most of them have a Catholic feel to them because that's where this really originates. But it was really interesting. I found a blog from a Baptist minister, and I found a blog from a Wesleyan church. So I've got two kind of extremes there, but they were common on 3 things. Actually, several things. One of them was they were absolutely certain that the sloth that I was telling you about not putting God first, and people recognizing that when they visit a church, they're convinced that that is the number one most important thing that's hurting churches in the United States today. The second thing is they came up with 3 characteristics. Now, they actually each had this list of characteristics to help you identify sloth, but they agreed on 3. I thought, sweet, 3 is a good number. Let's look at that. One of them is unwillingness to act. The second one was giving a half-hearted effort. And the third one was being easily discouraged when things don't go right, so we quickly give up. There's an author named Ryan Sanders. He wrote a book called Manhood Journey, and he has a website and a blog that has that same title. I recently discovered that, and it's really interesting for men, particularly if you have kids. This guy, he's made it his mission to help you become a better Christian father. And so I started reading it. My kids are out of the house now, but I thought, hey, every now and then he's got to have something beyond the 10-year-old relationship. So I've been reading it every now and then. And he actually had something about sloth. Remember I told you how God sometimes works in interesting ways? Well, I wasn't looking on his blog for this week, but sure enough, on Monday afternoon, I get on and look, and he's got something about sloth. And he says this. He says, I am convinced sloth is a sin of comfort. Think about that for a second. I told you that I love my couch. But I don't love this couch as much as I loved the last couch. Our daughter had an apartment in Colorado Springs where we had to furnish it. And then she ended up going to an apartment the next year that was furnished. And so she didn't have a place for this couch. So we took the couch. It was this huge, long, brown couch. And it was the kind where you sat down, you just kept going and going and going until you were almost on the floor. So it was a little difficult to get out of. But when you were in it, when you laid down on this couch, it was like it just kind of wrapped you up. It was perfect for watching old movies where you wanted to get that nap. Awesome for that kind of experience. There's just one problem. My wife hated that couch. And it turns out after talking to my daughter, our son-in-law, even my son who once sat on that couch, it turns out that I was the only one who loved that couch. Not a single soul liked it. The bottom line is we don't have that couch anymore. As soon as it was available to be sold, when we had the opportunity to get the basement finished and my wife had the opportunity to get new furniture, it was pretty clear that couch's days were numbered. And indeed, it actually ended up being a cool story that I won't get into now, but somebody who really needed that couch got that couch. But the idea was I was the only one comfortable. The other folks weren't comfortable with the couch, and yet I kept the couch because I liked it. And that's the premise that Sanders uses, is if we're really concerned about the souls of people around us, if we're really worried about serving God, then we will make changes. We will allow the church to change, because it's not about the comfort of those of us in the room already. It's about the comfort of people when they come into the church for the first time so that they feel at home. And that may look different than what it does for us now. I want to read John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a Jewish festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, in the north city wall, is a pool with the Aramaic name Bethsaida. It had 5 covered porches, and a crowd of people who were sick, blind, lame, and paralyzed sat there. A certain man was there who had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, knowing that he had already been there a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" The sick man answered, "Sir, I don't have anyone who can put me in the water when it is stirred up. When I'm trying to get to it, someone else has gotten in ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." Immediately the man was well, and he picked up his mat and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. Those last words are critical. That day was the Sabbath. It was the day of rest, a day to be slothful if there ever was one. But Jesus wasn't. Jesus decided that this person needed to be healed. Amy and I traveled to Jerusalem in January, late January, early February, And this is the ruins of the pools of Bethsaida that we just talked about. All you can see there left are some of the columns from those 5 porches that are over that particular water. And here's what the legend said. This was in Jerusalem, but it had been taken over by pagans. But even the pagans believed that angels would come down from time to time and stir the water. And if the water was stirred, the first person to get into the water would be healed of whatever ailment that faced them. So with that in mind, Jesus comes to the pool of Bethsaida, and he stands there and he sees this man who has been ill for 38 years. And Jesus walks up to him, and I think he's probably a little curious, because I don't think obviously Jesus knows what's going on, but he wants the person to recognize it too. And he says, "Don't you want to be healed?" And I got this vision of this guy looking up at Jesus saying, "Well, yeah. Why do you think I'm here? I've been here for 38 years, or up to 38 years. We don't really know how long he'd been there, but it clearly had been a long time. And he probably was a frequent customer there. Customer in quotes. Because he wanted to be healed. So he comes to this part of Jerusalem, and Jesus decides, you know what, you've waited long enough. I'm going to heal you. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to heal you. Now, a lot of times Jesus would have a person do something, like spit in the dirt, take the mud, that kind of thing to heal blindness. Not this time. Jesus just tells him, get up. He doesn't take him to the water. He doesn't cause the water to be stirred and take him to there, because I think Jesus didn't want anybody to misconstrue that this was not a pagan water trick. I think he wanted everybody around him to see that, nope, I healed this person. The power of God healed this person. He was being a witness and an example for the people around him. He wanted them to understand that he was the one who provided the healing. Jesus took action. He wanted people to see that faith and mercy in action as a means of worship to the living God was what just transpired. So let's go back and look at those 3 characteristics. The 3 characteristics that these 2 blogs agreed upon to help you identify sloth. But we're going to look at them from the idea of questions. So there's going to be a question in each one of these, 3 questions. And I just want you to reflect as we go through it. Is this me? There might not be a yes to all of them. I doubt it's yes to all of them, actually. But you might get a yes to one of them, and then you know which one to work on. The first one, are you willing to take action? Remember what Jesus does here in the story. I think Jesus probably had a couple of issues. Number one, I think he took issue with the idea that these had been taken over as pagan pools. I think he was a little concerned about that, and that all these Jewish people who were followers of God, it wasn't too far removed from the synagogue, are at these pools waiting for these miracles to happen in the name of some pagan god in the waters that were stirred up. But I think he took more issue with the idea that this man had been here for up to 38 years, and nobody helped him at all. Nobody noticed him for the 5th day in a row and helped take him right to the edge of the pool, so as soon as it was stirred up, he could literally be pushed in or dipped in the water. They left him there. Nobody helped. Something else got in their way. Something that they themselves were concerned about instead of this man. They were not willing to take action. So Jesus wants to know, are you willing to take action? Now, we don't have pools of Bethsaida on the grounds of the church. But during the prayer time we were talking about, we have a homeless shelter that needs financial help and that needs resources. We have people who are hungry. We have a school across the street that has a significant number of kids on reduced and free lunch. Do they have the tutoring help that they need? Do they have mentors that can help them? Are you willing to take action? I know in my business life, I'm always concerned about, am I doing what I need to do for my boss? In my case, the boss is the bishop. It's a little intimidating at times to say that, but it's the truth. So the bishop for our area. So I want to know, does he have what he needs? Does he need anything else from me? I have to remember that it's also Jesus saying, I need stuff from you, Todd. I need you to do X, Y, Z for me, whatever that is. I have to remember that. Do you need some ideas? I have some for you this morning. These are things that we've talked about in this church, in some cases for almost a year, that we need help with, but no one has stepped up. We need an additional Sunday school teacher to teach middle school ages. Praise God that we have a problem of we now have groups of middle schoolers that we really need to separate out so that we have better teaching. Nobody has stepped forward. We're leaving the lame man at the pool of Bethesda at the gate instead of carrying him to the water. How about an easier task? We've been asking for help for a communion steward for a year. 1 week a month, 1 hour a month. Bread, preparing juice for the communion that we celebrate. No one has stepped forward for that. Are you ready to take action? Greeters and ushers. Now, this is one that shows we can do this, because a few weeks ago, we were really struggling with getting greeters and ushers. And you know what? Now there's a sign-up sheet in the back, and it's not full, but we have had some success of getting people volunteered to do that. So ask yourself, are you ready to take action with any of those things or with something else that may come up that would help the church? Because helping the church serves as a witness for Christ. Second thing, are you giving your best effort? When we do something for the church, are we going all in on it, or are we just kind of helping because it looks good, but we're not really giving our all? Do we take care of the facility? Are we taking care of people? Are we visiting shut-ins? Do we invite people to join us for worship? Are we willing to be uncomfortable, like I talked about earlier, to make others comfortable? This is the one that I have to answer yes to. I have a great example from just a few weeks ago. I got busy with stuff at work, and it usually takes me about 2 to 3 hours to prepare for the adult Sunday school class. Sometimes a little more, but 2 to 3 hours is a pretty good average time for me. And as I'm going through that lesson that week, I just wasn't feeling it. What I was feeling was what was on television. And so I was paying way more attention to the TV than I was to preparing my lesson. So I showed up that Sunday with a real half-hearted effort at a lesson. And I bet the people who were in the class that day recognized it. Man, this isn't flowing the way that it usually does. I had to learn a lesson. So ever since then, the last few weeks, and this is probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago, when I do my Sunday school lesson, I go downstairs or I go up to my office and I turn all the TVs off and I'm focused. I had to learn that lesson, though, of going through a really uncomfortable hour with other adults that I just was not feeling like I was giving my best effort. We have to give effort of inviting people and engaging in ministry. Think about missionaries for just a second. These are people who are all in. When we think of missionaries, what do we think of? We think of people who leave the United States and they go overseas and they dig wells for water or they bring health care to a community. Those are the two big ones, but there's other things that missionaries do. We think of people leaving the United States to go overseas because we're teaching the gospel to people who don't necessarily know who Christ is. But did you know the United States, in terms of number of people who don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, is the 3rd largest mission field in the world today? We don't have to go to a third world country. We don't have to go to Africa. You live in the community that has the distinction of being the least churched city and county in all of the Great Plains Conference, and the 3rd or 4th per capita in the whole South Central jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church. That's our mission field. But when was the last time we invited people to church? When was the last time we engaged people beyond those who were already here? Are we ready to take action? And are we ready to give our best effort? Because that's what Christ demands of us. Finally, the third one, do we give up too easily? This is one where society does us some injustice here, because we live in a world today that we want what we want, when we want it, where we want it, all those different things. Now. But the reality is sometimes things take time and they take effort. It doesn't just happen overnight, and it isn't super easy. Most of you know that both of our kids are college athletes. Our daughter played college basketball. She just graduated in May, and our son's a junior pitcher at Nebraska Wesleyan. And both of them have really great examples from their childhood of having to work to get better at something. Our daughter made her what amounts to like a club team, but she really struggled with left-handed layups. And so she would go out in the driveway and she would spend hours working on left-handed layups until she got to the point where, frankly, she was better at left-handed layups at full speed than she was right-handed layups. It was fun to watch. It was kind of painful at times, but it was fun to watch for the most part. Our son was trying to learn how to throw a curveball properly because I was his pitching coach and I wouldn't let him throw it unless he could throw it exactly correctly, because there's not the extra strain on your elbow. And so when he finally turned 13, I let him use it, let him start learning to throw a curveball. My shins played a tremendous price for that activity, because the number of balls that got bounced at 58 feet and hit me in the leg were pretty numerous at that time. But now, as a 20-year-old, I'm proud dad moment. He led his team in an ERA because last year, his earned run average, because he's got a great curveball. But it took effort for him to get that far. And they didn't give up. Our daughter was awful the first day in the driveway trying to learn to do that left-handed layup. Our son, I don't think he threw a ball that didn't bounce on the dirt the first time we went out and tried to throw a curveball the right way. They didn't give up. And here's how I know we're capable of it. I know we have some golfers out here in the congregation. You can't tell me, golfers, that you haven't had one round at least that was absolutely awful. Every ball went into a sand trap or went into the water hazard or didn't hit the fairway. And yet you didn't give up the game, did you? Because you wanted to get better at it. It was fun. You wanted to come back out and do it again. You recognized that you had to work at it. Today, friends, I'm hoping to get us to recognize that we have to work at this thing called discipleship of Jesus Christ, because it is a job. It's a job that we've been given. And this community needs this church. We live in a community that people are broken. They are downtrodden. Where are they going to find the hope that they need? It's not going to come on television. It's likely not going to come from a book. It's likely not going to come from a radio. It's going to come from a one-on-one relationship with a person. And I think that person can be the people sitting in the pews of this church today and the people that we talk with and we teach. We have a survey right now called Readiness 360 that we're working on. The whole idea behind this is to help this church discern, what are we good at? What can we be better at? And then we have other tools once we figure out what we can be good at that will help us figure out, where are the voids in Lawrence? Where are the trouble spots in Lawrence that we can make a real difference in people's lives? But we have to have all those things together to make this work. Now, I don't know how many people we've had take the survey, but I know that as of a week ago, it was like at 29. So less than half of the people who are here on an average Sunday had taken this poll. It's like a 15-minute survey. Are you letting other things get between you and Christ? Because being unwilling to take a 15-minute survey probably is letting something get between you and Christ. Like I said, this is a tough subject, and I'm sure that I have stepped on some toes this morning. But these characteristics matter. These things matter because people are watching you. They are watching the actions of the church, and they are watching the inaction of the church. If we are not active, if we are not doing these things, we are not serving as a witness for Christ. And if we are not serving as the witness of Christ, what are we doing here? It's a harsh question. And it's not for my benefit. It's not for the idea of growing the church so the numbers look good for everybody. This is about your relationship with God. It is about how Christ sees you. And one day all of us will stand in paradise, and there's going to be a question asked of us. Jesus is going to ask, "What did you do for me?" What is your answer? Something to contemplate as we keep going forward. Amen.